Okay, so we're going to talk about spectroscopy. And specifically, we're going to talk about the spectroscopy that we're going to use in organic chemistry. And I'm going to have a little difficult time not speaking in a shrill fashion because there are some very simple messages that we can get from spectroscopy that, frankly, students often miss. So I want to take our time with this. And that's why I'm starting out with a conversation that doesn't actually come out of a textbook, because I want to start out with something very simple. All right? Let's see if we can get something simple out of this. First of all, there are three kinds of spectroscopy that we are going to be considering. First, we are going to be considering mass spectrometry, okay? And we're going to call it mass spec. Occasionally we may say MS, okay? Mass spectrometry. The second kind is IR, or infrared spectroscopy, okay? IR spectroscopy, so we might say IR spec, but that's what we're talking about, infrared spectroscopy, IR. The next kind and last kind is NMR, which actually stands for nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy, all right? And I will say we're going to get down in the weeds with that a little bit. We're going to talk both about proton NMR and carbon NMR, all right? So those are the three kinds, four if you count carbon NMR, that we of spectroscopy that we are going to consider in organic chemistry. Now, let's take a minute and talk about the simple that we can get from this. Mass spectroscopy or spectrometry is going to tell us about mass. Yes, it's that simple, okay? So if I analyze some compound, let's say with that formula, and another compound with say this formula, CH4 and C26, they're going to give us different mass specs. The spectra are going to be different, okay, because they have different masses. It's that simple, right? So we're going to be measuring mass with mass spectrometry. Now, don't worry, we are going to get more detail here in a little bit. But for now, it's very important. And believe it or not, we'll get down to the end of the semester sometimes, and there'll be some students who haven't yet seen, I think, the trees for the forest. All right, so we're going to get mass with mass spectroscopy, with spectrometry. In IR, we're going to get information about bonds. Okay, for example, a carbon-oxygen bond is going to give us a different signal than a carbon-hydrogen bond. And a carbon-oxygen bond is going to give us a different signal than a carbon-oxygen double bond, okay? So this is what we're going to differentiate with IR. So oftentimes people will say that we are going to identify functional groups with IR, and you can see why, right? If you have a functional group that looks like that, it's got different kinds of bonds in it than a functional group that looks like that, which has different kind of bonds in it than a functional group that looks like that, right? But really what we're measuring is bonds. So IR, we measure bonds, and we're going to talk about functional groups with IR, all right? And finally, with NMR, we are going to talk about environment or electronic environment. And so what I mean by that is we are going to say, right, that these two carbons have a different environment. Let's say that, okay? So these two carbons have a different environment, and so we're going to get different signals with NMR. So let me write that word down. We're going to let me go back to green. We're going to be measuring electronic environment, and I will say we're in the end we're going to get from that connectivity, how things are connected. So let me give one final example about that. If you have carbon, can you see that this, I'll put hydrogens on here because you would be in trouble if you didn't, right? Can't mix line bonds, but can you see I've got exactly the same atoms here, neopentane and normal pentane, right? And so this is torture, isn't it? I know it's killing you, it's killing me, but I am 51 years old, and very patient. Okay, so I'm almost done here. These are both C5H12. So what's the difference between these two? The difference is how they're connected. Okay, that's it right there. So again, I'm going to switch back to the first slide. Mass spec tells us about mass. IR spectroscopy tells us about bonds or functional groups. Okay, memorize that. That's super simple. And if you get that, there's going to be some questions that you can immediately get. Okay, and then finally, NMR spectroscopy tells us about electronic environment, which is really connectivity, how things are connected. All right, hold on to your hats. Get a few sheets of paper, a pencil, and get comfortable. We're going to have some interesting conversations about spectroscopy.